Hey, what's up? So like 10 months ago, we did a really big announcement. Oh, hey, welcome to my shop. I was a little long-winded in the whole announcement thing back then, but I basically went on to tell everybody that we're ripping apart our entire shop and rebuilding it from the ground up. I mean, not the ground up, the walls and the building are gonna stay there, but the whole inside is gonna be different. I guess I'm a little long-winded now. Now, I fully expected that we were gonna start on that project pretty soon after we made that announcement. But, you know, life got in the way. We bought that cabin in Central Oregon, all sorts of other things happened, and we're only getting to it right now. But the important thing is, we are getting to it. Now, you might have forgotten, we did post a video 10 months ago explaining why we're doing this whole shop remodel, but in case you don't remember, because you look at this and you think, you got a big shop, what the heck are you doing? Well, follow me. I want to show you why we're doing this entire thing. Now, my wife and I used to run a textile printing business. I actually did that before I ever did the woodworking. And her studio is through the bathroom. Back here, see, some of you didn't even know this space existed back here. Now, my wife hung up her screen printing hat a few years ago, decided she wanted to focus on being a mother. I said, absolutely, that's a fantastic idea. And I wasn't just saying that because it meant that eventually we could take over her studio space. So to make this space more usable, this wall has to come down, which is okay because that wall wasn't there to begin with. We actually put that up to make this space. So I already know it's not load bearing, it's not structural, it can be completely opened up. So the idea is to take this wall, open up the entire space, and then while we're at it, I mean, we might as well redo the entire shop. Because to be honest, I kind of threw the thing together back when I was doing client work just because I needed a space, and I didn't put enough thought into it to make it really all it could be. So, we're gonna rip it apart and spend the next year, 2 years, 3 years, as long as it takes to make this space and now that space into a mega shop. Now, if you didn't watch the update video like 10 months ago, you're probably wondering, well, what are you gonna do in the meantime while you're redoing this shop? Where are you gonna build? And that's an excellent question. And we do have a plan in place for a temporary shop. So I'm gonna show you a video that we posted on Patreon a few months ago that kind of shows where our temporary shop is gonna be. And if you're not signed up on Patreon, you should, because you get a lot of behind the scenes footage like this video. You're missing out. But anyways, you can sign up for that down in the video description. For now, just watch this video. You asked for it, you get it. You wanna see what the garage looks like before we turn this into our temporary wood shop. So we're replacing these garage doors. With full lit doors, so there's gonna be glass all the way up, but it's gonna be etched glass so you can't see through it, but it'll let a lot of light in, which will be nice. We're gonna do this one and that one over there. Let me open this up. You didn't see that, did you? Did you see the code? Here it is. So it's not huge, but I feel like it's a pretty good space. A lot of you guys, oh look, there's Ivor. Hey Ivor. I'm giving people a tour of the garage. No, not the car, just the garage. So basically we have to make my wife park outside, which she's not thrilled about, but that's okay. So we're gonna move the car out of here. We have to redo the lighting and the whole thing because there's only 2 light bulbs for light in the entire garage, which is unfortunate. So I think I'm going to do can lights across the whole thing because it'd be nice anyways in the future. Next Monday they're coming to do epoxy floors because I used to use this as a paint booth at one time when I was doing custom cabinets, this whole side. So there's a lot of overspray all over the floor, so they're going to have to like get all that off, which is kind of going to be a pain. The walls are just drywall that hasn't even been mudded and taped. So we're going to mud and tape all these walls, maybe spray some like texture on there. And then we're gonna paint everything. Back here is the furnace and hot water heater on this weird bench thing. We're actually gonna take those barn doors that are in the shop that are always behind us with the tools hanging on them. We're gonna put the track in here and we're gonna put those 2 huge barn doors in front of this. It's almost the perfect width that you can still access everything by sliding them back and forth. So that'll kind of be covered up. And then we'll have a blank canvas in here to put in the table saw. We're gonna do dust collection, everything you would in a normal shop. So we're gonna turn the garage into a shop.
Why?
Because we're gonna redo that shop. Where have you been? So anyways, that's the garage. We'll keep you up to date.
We're eventually gonna have to put everything back.
Eventually. Just don't tell your mom about any of this, okay? Oh, hi. Come on in. Progress has been made. As you already saw, we replaced the garage doors. They look much better now and let a lot more light in. Speaking of light, we got rid of those 2 itty bitty light bulbs that were up here, and we added I don't know, like 12 or 16 can lights. Can't really tell because it's daytime, but it's really nice and bright in here. Also, we completely mudded, taped all the walls, sprayed a little texture on there, painted them a nice white color. They'll be brown soon enough with sawdust. So now, the only things left to really do are, I want to replace the outlets because they're these old ones and they're just kind of hanging in there. Oh yeah, we also redid the floors. Forgot to mention that. I have a new door over here that we're gonna put on this door, well, replace this door. This actually goes into the laundry room. Remember that whole remodel? And the idea is that now that we have windows in the garage doors and the windows in here, it will let a little bit of light into that space because there's no windows in there. So we need to put the new door on there. I want to trim out these windows, rewire this whole thing because the cord for the sprinkler runs across the window. So I want to put an outlet over here. And then I think we're ready to start moving stuff in. I'm not gonna lie. It's kind of bittersweet tearing apart my old shop. I have built a lot of things in this space. In fact, I put this space together back before I was even doing YouTube content. I was just a lowly wannabe woodworker. I'm not joking when I say that I started woodworking in this space, I learned how to do woodworking in this space, and then I started teaching people how to do woodworking in this space. But that also means when I first put this space together, I really didn't know what I was doing. Sure, I've changed it and adapted it over time to better suit my needs, but I'm really excited at the opportunity to start fresh, to build a new space exactly the way I want it to be. But as I've also learned over the years, nothing happens quickly, and this is going to be no different. Because as I already mentioned, before we can even start working on the new space, we have to set up a temporary space. Step 1, move these gigantic, ridiculously heavy barn doors from my old shop into our new temporary shop space in the garage. Now the funny thing about these is when I installed them by myself. Now, many years later and many years older, I have no clue how in the world I did that. Because even with me and Craig, these things were flippin' heavy. It also didn't help that I put the barn doors up before I built that bank of cabinets, so in order to get them off, we have to lift them over the cabinets, which, well, was kind of a pain. But between the two of us, we managed to wiggle the first barn door off and set it on the ground. And then with one door under our belts, the other one came off. I'm not gonna lie to you, it was just as hard as the first one, but we got it done and they were removed. But nothing in life ever is easy, and these barn doors is the exact same story. I measured the ceiling height from the floor to the ceiling in the shop. It was 119 inches. Then I measured the height from the floor to the ceiling in the garage where we wanted to put the barn doors. And of course, it was 112 inches, which means the barn doors are too tall to fit in the garage, at least in their current state. But never letting something like that stop me in the past, I decided to just modify the barn doors to make them work. The issue there is that I had these barn doors custom made by a steel fabricator who welded the entire frame. And although I'm fairly decent at woodworking, I know nothing about metalworking. Do you even call it metalworking? Metaling? Fabricating? Whatever the metal dudes call it. So I'm going to try and make this up as I go. Because I don't have the ability to weld, I'm going to have to just cut and bolt this thing to make it smaller. This is one of those things that made perfect sense when I did it in my head. Now whether or not that works out in real life, we'll have to wait and see. I started out by measuring the length that I needed the barn door to be, and I cut it to that length with this grinder I picked up from the folks at Festool. I've never used a grinder like this before. That shows you how little I know about metal. But I was pleasantly surprised how easily it cut through this steel. Is that steel? I think it's steel. I mean, that's really the only type of metal, right? I mean, I know there's aluminum, but I don't think it's aluminum. Wrought iron? Basalt. No, maybe that's a rock. Anywho, once I got the bottom chopped off, I needed to manipulate the bottom so that I could bolt it back on and there would still be a complete frame around the barn door. So I stuck it in my metal chop saw that I've used on past projects, and I cut off the little arms that were sticking out. Then I needed to cut some tabs on either end so that they would fit around the bottom of the existing frame of the barn door. So I used a square and a Sharpie to mark what pieces I need to cut off, and then I just used the grinder very carefully to remove all that said material. I also used the grinder to clean it up a little bit so it wasn't sharp and ouchy, and then it fit on the bottom of the frame, kind of like this. I was actually pleasantly surprised how well this worked. With my little tabs overlapping the outside frame, I just drilled a hole all the way through both corners, and I inserted a bolt. Sure, it doesn't look as nice and clean as the original perfectly welded and grinded version, but it's the best I could do with the tools that I had. With our two barn door frames completely fixed and altered to the correct length, now it was time to remove the track from the ceiling in the old shop and mount it in the garage. So with Craig's help, we took down the old track, went over to the garage and found out where all of our studs were in the ceiling and marked exactly where we wanted the new track to land. Then we hoisted the new track up on top of a few ladders, Craig held it in place, and I sank in some screws. A little zip, a little zap, a little zoop later, and our track was completely installed into studs all the way across and ready to mount our barn doors. So we went back over to the old shop and carried the barn doors to the garage. Lucky for us, it's only about 75 yards. So although they were pretty heavy, we managed to make the trek unscathed. The only downside to installing the barn doors on this particular day is it's the one day that it decided to be about 100 degrees in Oregon. So working on a ladder up towards the top of the ceiling was a very sweaty job. Not to mention these doors are still ridiculously heavy. But with Craig pushing and me pulling and then me pulling and Craig pushing, we managed to get the little wheelie things inside the track and the barn door was running nice and smooth. With one down, we brought over the other barn door and then decided to poke a hole in the ceiling. Right now. Oh jeez. Freshly textured and painted ceilings. That's okay. Nothing a little spackle won't fix. And then we did the exact same thing with that barn door, lift and pushed and pulled, and we got that one in the track. And doesn't that look much nicer? Now we don't have to stare at the furnace and the hot water heater every time we build a piece of furniture in here. Next on my to-do list was to get rid of this old door that's been here since we bought the house and replace it with something a little more modern. Now I actually had this door custom made for this space from Portland Millworks. It's got glass in it which should let a little light into the laundry room. The only downside is that I didn't order it pre-drilled for the door handle or mortised out for the hinges. So I'm going to have to do all of that myself. But before I got to work on that, I wanted to test and make sure the door was actually going to fit in the space because, well, I hadn't done that yet. So very carefully, I gave it a push, and sure enough, it seems like, in theory, it should fit. While I had it in place in the door jamb, I marked out where the hinges were going to land. Now, inevitably, if you're going to replace a door, there are two types of hinges. There are ones with rounded corners, and there are ones with square corners. And for some strange reason, the hinges you're replacing are always the opposite of what were there to begin with, which is true in this case. Lucky for me, we were going from rounded corner hinges to squared off hinges, which always looks a lot cleaner than if you go from square hinges to rounded corner hinges. So I just used a chisel to manipulate the mortise that was there to fit the new hinges, and then I used the hinge as a template on my door to mark out where I needed to add mortises on the door itself. To do this, I just grabbed a router with a spiral upcut bit. I set the bit height the exact same depth as the thickness of the hinge, and then very carefully I used the router to hog out all the material almost all the way up to the line that I drew for my hinge. Then I cleaned up the whole thing with a chisel by hand until the hinge fit perfectly flush with the back side of the door. I did this 3 times because, well, there are 3 hinges, and then I screwed the hinges in place. Then with Craig's help, I carried the door inside the laundry room, and he held it in place while I screwed the hinges into the door jamb. Next, I needed to drill out all the holes for the door handle itself, which sounds a lot more complicated than it actually is. If you ever have to do this, just buy one of these door handle jig things. You just clamp it on the edge of the door, and it comes with the right size bits. You drill some holes, install your door handle, and boom, roasted. Your door is installed and works great. Now, these windows in the garage have been untrimmed since we moved in, and it's always driven me crazy because there's little gaps and voids around the edge of the window, and inevitably spiders and bugs and flies make a home in there, and then the inside of the window always looks real nasty. So I was really excited to finally get these trimmed out. So I set up a temporary little shop inside my temporary little shop with the portable table saw and miter saw, and I started taking measurements and chopping down pieces of wood. Now, I'm not going to give you a full tutorial on how to trim out a window. It's pretty basic. You do your inner frame kind of like this, a top and a bottom piece, and then you wedge those in place with your 2 side pieces, a bada bing, bada boom. You nail all those pieces in place, and then you cut some border pieces. Now, you can do this in a million different ways. I just did a classic mitered frame this time, but you can also do like a lower sill that's a shelf that comes out and you can set stuff on, but I didn't want to get that fancy. I just wanted to get it done and move on. Pretty soon I had my entire first window trimmed out, and I did the exact same thing to the other window. A bada bing, bada boom, a zip zap zoop, easy peasy lemon squeezy, all that stuff. A tap tap here, tap tap there, a cut to place, a nail, a glue, and the window looked something like this. And all I had to do after that was caulk all my seams and give it a fresh coat of paint, and the windows looked much better than they did to begin with. And now all the flies and bugs and spiders have a much nicer home to live in than they did before. I hope they appreciate it. While I was busy trimming out all the windows, Craig was busy going around and replacing all of the old outlets that were that ugly almond color that was real popular in the 90s with nice new bright white ones. And then with all those things crossed off the list, it was time to start moving some things into the shop. We hung up the Bourbon Moth sign on one of the barn doors. We hung up the Bourbon Blade banner on the other one because we want you people watching to remember that the Bourbon Blade is still for sale on my website, bourbonmoth.com, and maybe you should go pick one up. And then we decided to move a ton of clamps over and mount them on the front of the barn door. I didn't really know how to do this, so we just started mounting them on there and trying to fit them in there the best we could. Now, I've shown this in past videos, but my favorite clamp racks are these little shelf support brackets. They're actually 4 shelves. They're advertised as floating shelf brackets on Amazon, but they work perfect to hang clamps on a wall or barn door or wherever you want. I'll put a link down in the video description. On the other barn door, we mounted a bunch of chisels and screwdrivers and pull saws and hammers and marking tools, and pretty soon, those barn doors were very organized and looking pretty fly. Then I did all the important stuff, like hang up this custom domino coat rack I made a couple years ago, and mount our rag holder above the garbage can, so that when our fingers get dirty, we have something to clean them off with. I forget where I got this rag holder. To tell you the truth, I probably got it on Amazon too. I'll try and find it and put a link for that in the video description. But it perfectly holds this box of rags, and it's got a hole in the bottom so you can just dispense them easily. And because it's above the garbage can, you can just throw them away. Now, I'm not going to move everything over in this video, but one thing I really wanted to get in there was this drill and fastener organizer that I made probably a year and a half, 2 years ago. Yes, there is a video on this entire build. I will put a little link in the upper corner. You can go watch that if you want. But I dismantled the entire thing, completely cleaned it off, moved the French cleat over to the new garage, mounted it on the wall, and then I mounted the whole thing on the French cleat, just like that. And this is where it's gonna live for the next 10 years. And I'm just joking, it won't take 10 years for me to build the new shop. Maybe 5, 6 max. Anyways, I drilled a hole in the bottom of this so that I could plug in all the drill chargers. I screwed those in place, and then I installed all these little fastener drawers that I purchased on Amazon. Man, I sound like an Amazon advertisement. I promise I'm not sponsored by them. It's just, let's be honest, I'm an American, and it's the quickest and easiest way to get supplies. After we got all the fasteners in there, Craig loaded up our sandpaper storage slots with sandpaper while I hung some of our sponsor banners, because we love our sponsors. Bits and Bits, IsoTunes, I'm talking to you. And then eventually I want to build a permanent miter saw station against this wall. Well, as permanent as a miter saw station in a temporary shop would be. But for now, I just drug the mobile Capex over there with the little wings, and we'll use that until we can get something more substantial. I hooked it up to the dust collection, plugged it in, and we were ready to rock and roll. Then last but not least, I decided to wheel over this custom router table that I made out of a woodpecker's router table. Yes, there's also a video on that if you want to see the whole process. And pretty soon, we had the makings of a fine-looking garage shop place. I know it's not big, at least compared to what I'm used to, but I gotta say, I'm really excited to make this my home for the next month, maybe year, possibly decades, and see what we can build in this space. Who knows? Maybe we'll like having a smaller space so much we just never go back. And then we can turn that other space into a golf simulator. Or an Irish pub.
I have to say, this is the cleanest my garage has ever been. Now, we've got the space pretty much finished and ready to go. We did all the basics. We trimmed out the windows, we got these barn doors mounted. That was a chore, as you saw, but they look really nice, and they hide the furnace and the hot water heater, but you can still slide them if you ever need access to that stuff, and it gives us an extra place to store things, which is really important in a smaller space. We got this temporary miter saw set up over here. We are going to do a full video on building a miter saw station that's dedicated for that space. We moved the router table in, but you might be wondering, what about the other stuff? What about the table saw and the bandsaw and the drill press and the joiner and the planer? How are we going to fit all that in here? Well, we're actually going to get rid of almost all of our old tools, and we're going to donate them to the Katz Moses Woodworkers with Disabilities Fund, which is going to be really cool to get those tools into some awesome people's hands. And then we've teamed up with the cool people over at Powermatic, and we're getting some really sweet new tools for this space. But we still are trying to keep in mind that, let's say this was our space forever. This is as big of a space as we had to work with. We want to do it in a way that is going to be the best setup within these walls, because I think that's going to benefit you, the viewer, the most to see how we would set up this sort of space. The other big question you might have is dust collection. We got all this shiny new white paint. How are we going to keep it looking clean? And most importantly, how are we not going to be sucking in dust the whole time? Well, I'm glad that you asked, because we have a solution. We get asked all the time about dust collection. And most of you are wondering, what's the best dust collection for a smaller shop, a shop this size? So with that in mind, we went searching for the best dust collection solution that we could find for a small shop. And that's where the awesome people over at Oneida came in. They worked with us to figure out for this space what would be the ultimate dust collection setup. So within these boxes is something pretty sweet that we're not going to do in this video, but next video is all about dust extraction for a small shop. We're going to unbox this thing, we're going to set it up, and we're going to tell you why we chose this over other systems that are available on the market. So make sure that you tune in next week. I might need to read the instructions. And I hate instructions. You know what I just realized? This room is 25 by 25. That means it's a square space. Speaking of square space, I wanted to give a huge thanks to the sponsor of this video, which is, you guessed it, Squarespace. Now, if you don't know about Squarespace, what they are is basically this company that takes people like me who don't know how to do web design, and they make it super easy to design a professional looking, high quality website. All you gotta do is go to squarespace.com/bourbonmothwoodworking. You sign up for a free trial. You'll get 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain. And the cool thing is, when you get on squarespace.com, you can pick from a bunch of different templates and you can design a website that's exactly what you want it to be. And you don't have to be stuck with their templates. Let's say you like their template, but you don't really like their template. Well, you can customize all the templates so they're exactly what you want. And they have a bunch of other cool features too. Like, let's say you're building your website, but you don't have a domain name yet. Well, you can buy your domain name right through Squarespace. So you can just get on there, search for what you want, and if it's available, you just buy it right there. You don't have to go to another website to buy your domain. And if you're selling stuff on your website and you're selling stuff in person and you want to keep track of the quantities on both places, well, they make that really easy because you can take credit cards right through the Squarespace app, and when you sell something in person, it updates the quantity on your website. It takes all the hassle out of it. Right now, we're completely rebuilding our shop, and we've built this new space here, this square space, and let's say we want to tell a lot of people about it. Well, we can collect email addresses through Squarespace, create a newsletter, and then we can blast that information out to everybody just with the click of a button. I mean, Squarespace has thought of it all. So again, if you want to try it, go to squarespace.com/bourbonmothwoodworking and then sign up for a free trial, and then use the coupon code BOURBONMOTHWOODWORKING when you check out to get that 10% discount. It's pretty sweet. I like Squarespace, and I like this Squarespace. So, thanks to them for sponsoring the video. Until next time, goodbye.